Ladies and gentlemen, when I continually state in most of my videos that President Trump signed an executive order combating anti-Semitism on college campuses, I do so because it's running rampant, especially with what's going on nowadays. It's running rampant because of CNN contributors like a gentleman who I won't name, but I'll put the link below. CNN cuts ties with freelancer who tweeted praise for 1930s and 1940s German leader. You can't say his name because it's against the algorithm. But this is the mentality of a great many Democrats, Democratic politicians, the left in general. What they'll do, because they can't possibly defend a certain course of action, or they can't possibly look at a complex situation, geopolitical controversy, certain atrocities that are going on, or a horrendous conflict with nuance or context. They must have this appeal to a distorted version of history. I wrote an op-ed in the Jerusalem Post condemning AOC and her absolutely warped and distorted viewpoint of history that Yad Vashem in Jerusalem completely refuted. It was devoid of any historical fact, stating that facilities Trump once used, that Biden is using now, were the same as certain, I don't want to get into it, but camps from that time period. You cannot equate what took place with that regime in 1930s and 1940s Germany and what they did and the absolute unspeakable atrocity, barbarism, inhumanity with the most evil ending of millions upon millions upon millions of human lives. I can, of course, speak, I could explain myself in a better manner, but I'm trying to walk on eggshells because of YouTube guidelines and policies. And I'm going to speak also to my African American and black viewers. Democrats and wonderful liberals do this to your history as well, in addition to the history of my people. Okay, I'm Jewish. They do this to the history of Latino citizens as well. They do this with the history of every group that generally votes Democrat. They take a time period from that history, whether it's the civil rights movement or the 1930s and 1940s Germany. There is categorical good versus evil. There's no room for debate. They take that and they say, our opposition to Trump is just like what took place in 1930s and 1940s Germany. AOC did it in the most absurd, warped, and twisted way, where even the museum in Jerusalem, the Yad Vashem, refuted her claims, saying, learn more about the topic. You're completely distorting and revising history to suit your own vapid political goals, while you jettison them when Biden is president. You have a CNN contributor who literally wants 6 million of my people to perish again, or people of my religion or ethnic background. I thought that words were the same as physical. I thought words led to, justified any reaction. That's the way that's the way the left thinks. I grew up with sticks and stones can break your bones, but bad words will never hurt you, and I still believe in that. But the hypocrisy is unbelievable. It was President Trump who stood by the only country of there's only one country in the world with a specific religion or ethnic group. One country. Surrounded by numerous, almost every country in that region, by the way, has a constitution or has laws or a state that's revolving, or that is directly revolving around the ethnicity or a religion. Okay, so the buzzword is the buzzword state. That entire region is composed of countries that would fit that description. Okay? That's number one. Number two, I don't want to get into the politics, because that YouTube guidelines is like, so hit subscribe to this channel right now because I'm trying my best. This was a dispute, a legal dispute within a country with laws. Legal dispute. Evictions are a legal dispute within the boundaries of a country. That was met by a military response. Of course, there's a disparity in power, and that's horrendous. And yes, I want those people should be alive. Especially the young people should be alive. You don't blame, however, the country that's defending itself. You blame the country, or you blame the group that is deemed to be the word T, even by European organizations, for deliberately using civilians, knowing there's going to be an overwhelming response, and knowing that Democrats and media in the United States are going to push one vantage point and say, oh my goodness, okay, there should be, oh my goodness, it's only the power disparity, focus on the injustices of one country. This was a legal dispute. A legal dispute inside a country met by a military response, where the people engaging in the military response, the group, might not even have widespread support within it. So that's another thing the left completely ignores. Knowing it's going to get overwhelming retaliation. Because when you get into the military realm and you go into a military confrontation with a greater military, you're going to then, the dynamics are understood by that group that launches retaliation for a domestic legal dispute within the boundaries of a country. That being said, I'm not saying that anyone deserved anything. I'm saying that there is an equation here that is completely ignored by Democrats and by people like this individual who actually wants this is the definition of anti-Semitism. He wants another 1930s and 1940s leader to annihilate, just like a left-leaning pundit was kicked off of Twitch. The anti-Semitism is so rampant. It's not a critique. When you're calling for an entire country to be obliterated, you are literally acting like the 1930s and 1940s Germans, who did that to a nation, almost was successful. Annihilating and slaughtering. And when you use words and twist definitions, there is no planned extermination or destruction taking place by the greater power within that region over others. The population of the side that has less military armament is increasing. Okay? When they use Dr. Raphael Lemkin's word that he created when he was looking at, when he was studying the Armenian genocide, they use that word. they completely distort the definition. They say, well, the UN has a different definition. Yeah, Democrats and the left have to distort definitions. They have to distort history. They have to appeal to emotions of what they believe is fair, knowing very well that when a certain group retaliates militarily for a legal dispute against an overwhelming military power, there's going to be a dynamic, unfortunately, that takes place. Then the condemnation of only that country, when any country would react in the same manner. Again, from a legal dispute within the boundaries of a specific country. Legal disputes generally don't automatically lead to military confrontations that are provoked. And they shouldn't. But my point is, look at the reaction. The true nature of a great many people on the left is not a critique. There is an animus, a contempt, a disdain, and a hatred for one particular group of people. That's called anti-Semitism when it's leveled against people of my faith. Okay? I am Jewish. So when you want another 1930s and 1940s German leader, because you blame only one country for what's taking place, when that country was provoked militarily because of a legal dispute, okay, a legal dispute should never be the precursor to a military response. Military is this realm. Legal is this realm. Diplomacy is another realm. Armament and heart and weaponry, that's another realm. Okay, two different realms. When you combine the two and you utilize the history of people of my faith, it's the same as when Democrats and media and the left utilize the history and the suffering of African American and black citizens and citizens of Latino descent and Asian Americans. They can't deal with actual events taking place with their vantage point. They have to call everyone that they disagree with the 1930s and 1940s Germans when they embody the same fanatical tactics and when they literally want to obliterate the only country of a certain faith in a region where almost every other country surrounding it has a legal system, a constitution that literally states, yeah, we are a state based on our ethnicity. Go look at every country in that and look at the constitution. By the way, constitutions within those countries. The mentality on the left is complete and utter ignorance in terms of history. Go to Wikipedia and see what religion originally Jesus Christ was. Then get back to me about colonization. Go to Wikipedia if people read Wikipedia. Okay? There's nothing that ties Trump with 1930s and 1940s Germans aside from the apoplectic, distorted view of history of morally superior, yet oftentimes indignant and apoplectic liberal Democrats and the far left who literally can't debate on the merits. They can't debate on what's taking place either politically within the United States or in an international relations sense because they don't have any ideas or logic that actually resonates. So AOC says, well, these are certain types of camps. No, they're not. No, they're not at all. The left says that country is engaged in genocide. No, it's not. Not at all. Not even close. That has nothing to do with the planned extermination, slaughter of millions upon millions. You have to take and twist history because you lack basic logic, because the left generally lacks basic logic on a lot of things. I'm speaking in roundabout terms, but look, this journalist that was a contributor to CNN doesn't deviate from a great many people, if not probably well over half the people on the left. The contempt and animus towards that one state and disdain has a lot to do with anti-Semitism. It's not just because when you completely distort history, here's an example. They use a map of that country, okay, the country where I had my bar mitzvah in. They use a map. Look at what this one country is doing to the other side. They lost 1948 war with numerous countries against one initially small country, still small country. Same thing, 1967. Numerous countries lost. 1973, numerous countries lost. And then other, military conflicts. 48, 67, 73. Three major geopolitical events completely missing in context. But you'd have to know something about history, my God. You would have to have learned something about history, even if you address those and you say, well, it doesn't matter, at least address it, because of course it does matter. And I'm not even saying that the country I had my bar mitzvah in is right about everything, but the allegations and the words and semantics, you ever realize that people on the left have to redefine words because their arguments are so poorly constructed and lack basic logic? They must redefine words. Otherwise, they lose every argument, or almost every argument. Here is interesting. They're like, well, capitalism is horrible, socialism is better. Name me a country, a socialist country that doesn't have a much higher poverty rate, like exponentially higher than the United States of America or most capitalist countries. You can't do that. See, the whole argument is most people on the left want to be morally superior at the expense of being morally and intellectually inferior, or at the expense of being factually wrong. When AOC said, well, it's better to be morally right than factually right. You can't be morally right unless you're factually right. You can't be just unless you have truth. And whereas I'm not saying that like one country is 100% right. I'm not saying that the country I had my bar mitzvah in, it's not 100% right. And it's a tremendous horror what's taking place. But look at the context. How many lives in the country with the greater military superiority would the left be willing to sacrifice, since it's the left that has the endless condemnation and judgment over the response? If you are a government, you have to defend your citizens. Any government would do so. If you believe that the organization that is sending the projectiles, thousands upon thousands, is fighting back, then you are completely illogical, because it's not logical to do that from a legal dispute or even a dispute in terms of law enforcement. If that's the dynamic and the calculus, then unfortunately you're going to have an atrocious metric, a horrendous metric. At the end of the day, you need to have two states. AOC, the left, Democrats don't want that. If you are watching from the smaller country, God bless you. I want you to have a completely functioning state. AOC and others do not. Or let's say they might not really focus on that because it doesn't suit them politically. There has to be concessions made between those two factions. And there has to be a negotiation between those two factions. And there hasn't been in a long time. And so when President Trump moves the embassy to Jerusalem, recognizes Golans as that country's, signs an executive order combating anti-Semitism, he does so from a moral and just vantage point. Because whether the left agrees or condones or thinks that that state should exist, it does, independent of the absurd mentality on the left. That state exists. The other faction that is opposing, that state doesn't exist yet. There are two leaders within that faction that are vying against one another. There's so many factors at play, and I want that state, that region, or that faction to have a state of its own. I do. Notice how the left never talks about that. And they have this absurd notion there's going to be a one state. It's like, no, there isn't. For a million reasons. The primary one being there's already a functioning state that belongs to a country that already exists. I don't think they're just going to give up what they've spent from 1948 until now, endless military conflict, because the left says, in our viewpoint, we feel that, or a multinational organization that lets much more grandiose human rights abusers on human rights panels says so. Give me your thoughts below. Hit subscribe right now. CNN was pretty honest. That is the mentality on the left. People on the left, their only goal is not being just or truthful. Their primary goal is feeling morally superior. It's almost always at the expense of being morally inferior because they lack basic logic. Give me your thoughts. Thank you.